Player Will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Today is the 2P character review, brand new unit added this week to Global as part of the Nier Automata collaboration. Today, pretty standard stuff. The character overview, the base and total stat analysis leading up to the report card where we look at those stats comparative to the rest of their kit, the rest of the characters in the game, give some general thoughts about what I think about the character, and that'll kind of translate to the rest of the presentation where we talk about the passives, the counters, the job ability, auto priority. We'll look at the TMR for review, job-based vision card eligibilities, general optimization, equipment pieces, nespers, and whatnot. I got 2 different sample builds here, and then some Truststones. Now, kicking things off, brand new Earth unit added here to Global. They've given her the unique main job of Yorhad number 2 Type P. That's how they get the 2P name. They gave her... Quick correction, they gave her the Axe Knight and Thief subjobs. She does equip fists with hat, cloth, and accessory as the other equips, with a move of 3, jump of 2 as a 90 cost unit. My faith recommendation here is 50. I'll be honest, you could go lower than that though, just for what we're seeing for the magic meta. I don't think there's a huge risk considering what her kit actually contains, but I think faith is totally fine. Don't overthink that. She does have a max range of 5 squares away, with 1 AoE ability on the main job and 3 single target abilities there as well. From a weapon type resistance standpoint, she's 20% positive to slash and 15% to strike. She got 10% to magic, so pretty well rounded there, all things considered. It's 0% to missile and minus 10% to pierce as the only negative weakness there. Honestly, a pretty good starting spot here. From a ailment perspective, 50% both to paralyze and confusion, with the 10% to berserk. Again, I'm not terribly worried about these status ailments. These ones are relatively common though as of late, just with Alaya and Winter Wrath and some of those other units, but I'm not terribly worried about that. Now, the master ability, they gave her 10 AoE res and 10 crit rate permanently, and the dream ability is 15 evasion rate and 10% strike res pen permanently, which is certainly very, very nice. But moving into the stat overview here now, in terms of base HP, she's just a smidge lower than some of the units as of late, but still for an evade-oriented unit, she does have a relatively high base HP here, coming in around that 75th percentile. I would definitely say above average for most other evade units. That's certainly a very nice thing to see. This is only one factor in the total survivability conversation though. We look at the base attack stat. She's basically at the median here, 385 base attack, neither here nor there. She doesn't end up with a staggeringly large attack stat like some of the more recent units that we've seen, but again, evade units are kind of a trade-off there in terms of damage output for survivability, for utility, that this is not necessarily a weakness like it might be for other characters, but she's still, all things considered, right in line with most units, so that's not a weakness in my opinion. Maybe relative to new units, but she does more than what they do. Now, base agility, she is in this central bucket here at 58 base agility. Overall, very good starting spot in my opinion. For the base dexterity, she actually ends up at 190, which is kind of surprising considering that she's a crit rate oriented unit, but they've done some things with the board nodes, with the mastery ability, as we saw that her net crit rate, all things considered, does end up relatively high, but base dexterity definitely starts off here on the low end, but she's still, again, if you're looking at kind of like a tendency compared to other characters, right in line with most other units in terms of base dexterity. And base luck, she does absolutely skew much higher here on the top end of things in this higher tier of base luck. Certainly a nice thing to see for that evade potential. Now, when we look at the total stat analysis, kind of transforming those charts into one, looking at relative strengths and weaknesses, again, nothing really stands out as like a serious deficiency, if you will. She has that strength on the luck side of things. The dexterity may be a smidge behind where most other units are. When we add in the board nodes, the mastery ability, things of that nature, I wouldn't say there's a lot of swings here. You know, a couple things slightly move a couple percentage points, but generally speaking, she's still relatively well-rounded. I'm pretty happy overall with the final result. And in terms of the board, they actually did chip her a little bit on the agility. 8 is a little bit lower than what most units have gotten as of late, but I don't think there's really any deficiency here. 72 luck on the board is certainly above average for many, that she ends up maintaining that innate luck stat pretty decently. Now, for the agility perspective here, she does have a passive that you can equip theoretically to get her to a higher level of agility. Her normal base agility with the vision cards equipped comes in around 79. She will get up to 85 when you equip that passive though, which I do recommend just as an evade-oriented unit. And when you do, she's definitely in this higher bucket of potentially speedier units. She's not the fastest unit in the game, but she definitely ends up being slightly above average for many that you encounter. Now, the crit hit and crit avoid, that total dexterity does get amplified by the extra 10 from the mastery ability, but she's actually got 20% crit rate on her board notes, which is far above average for what we saw recently. So she ends up at this lower of the two dots here, around 100%. That's definitely far above average because of those other external forms of crit rate. But there is something to consider. Her main passive that you'll have equipped has another 15% crit rate on it. And although maybe apples and oranges to compare that, most units don't have access to a passive with crit rate on it, that when you do equip that, she does end up in this much higher echelon of innately critical hit-oriented units, which is certainly a nice thing for her kit. We'll see with the follow-up attacks. But the crit avoidance rate, definitely a little bit above average here because of that luck stat. It will be even higher in practice because you will be adding a lot of luck-oriented things to her. So crit avoidance rate is definitely above average as well to help not take as much damage in that regard. Now, for accuracy, I would say roughly speaking average, maybe a smidge above average in base accuracy. She does not have any equipable passives to increase it, so she does end up being relatively average, all things considered. She does have a guaranteed hit mechanic. I don't really know if it's terribly reliable. I'll talk through the logic about that soon, but she does have access to guaranteed hit potential on all her attacks for 3 turns. It's a very interestingly cool mechanic. We'll see that soon. The evasion, she's definitely this higher echelon of evade-oriented units. She is a step below where the bar is set for many. I do think some of that is partially agility-driven, where some of the top-tier evade units are the fastest characters in the game, and she just doesn't meet that same threshold as they do. Her innate luck, although very strong, is slightly behind some of the other top-tier units. She does not have any passive abilities to give her some of the extra evasion either, although it is on the 140. So she's definitely a very, very evasive unit. It's not the barometer of some of the units you're used to seeing, though. We'll talk about the math later, though. But for now, the report card. And effective HP, going with a C here. No defense, no spirit. She does have 10 AoE res. Up to 25 innately, but I don't think you'll get that 25 quite often unless it's a specialized build. There's no unit res innately either, but again, as an evade unit, effective HP really isn't their strength, so this is not a huge concern. Most evade units are at this C level, if not lower. Most of them are lower, to be honest. And then from a survivability standpoint, though, I am going with a B here. She does have a 50% physical barrier on her main buff that also gives 20 defense. Her second buff gives her another 25% evasion, which is critically important to start that fight. Her main offensive ability that she'll use also adds 25 unit res for 3 turns, and she does this reflex as a main counter ability. So although I don't love all of this, and some of this does fade, like the evade buff will fade, defense is easily penetratable, barriers are getting broken more often compared to the last couple months, that I do still like a lot of this. It's just not amazing. So I'm going with a B overall for that survivability aspect. Now the damage, I'm going with a B here as well. The attack stat doesn't jump off the page, but there is a lot of follow-up damage. There's a lot of crit damage that goes along with it. She does have a counter ability to physical damage, potentially that when she evades a hit, she will counter punch them for 121% mod. That actually adds in some really good chip damage. She's got a physical barrier break as well. So the damage overall isn't going to like nuke you or blow you away. It's going to add up over time a lot though. So I'm kind of underrating the damage number just a little bit here, but I do think it's also going to matter whether or not she's in a strike team or a mono earth team. So there's some differences there too. So I'm trying to play both sides. Now agility, going with a B here as well. She has 79 versus 78 average. With passives, you get up to that 85 that we saw. It's not crazy fast, but it's definitely above average into a higher tier of things. There's no agility buffs or anything though, so her agility is going to be pretty competitive turn order wise with most other units that we're seeing now. The accuracy, going with a C here, average accuracy, but a very high luck oriented unit, which will help that overall accuracy. But when you get into those evade versus evade matchups, she definitely is not the accurate unit to bring to that, but she does have a very interesting guaranteed hit mechanic that we'll talk again soon in the actual job part of the presentation. Now evasion, going with a B here, far above your average evasion, most certainly. She's definitely an evade unit. There is a little bit of complexity to the math in the build though. We'll talk about that on the next slide and in the sample builds. Now the movement, going with an A here, jump of 2 and a move +1 option. So she's got great versatility for potential movement. Her main offensive AoE is also a shift type ability, so she'll jettison herself into a team of enemies. So there's a lot there from a movement perspective. And the auto ease of use grade, going with a B here. The AI is easy, great AI. The damage is pretty straightforward too. I think it's the evasion math that's going to trip some people up here. It does obviously require a lot of job-oriented vision cards to enable her in that strike team. So for most people, might be hard to reach that ceiling, but overall, it's still a really well-rounded unit, very easy to put into play. The game disruption, I am going with an A here though, adds a whole new dimension for strike and earth. She's coming in at a time where we're seeing the magic meta kind of kindling out a little bit, and is part of some of this new greatsword meta and other, physical damage dealing. She definitely fits in perfectly with that. Now for the passives, going with an A- here. She's kind of locked to 2 in my opinion, but the others are very, very viable for alternative builds, which I do think are on the table for her. The counter ability is going with an A+ here. Great general reflex, and she's got an additional counter that when she evades, like I mentioned, she will physically damage you for 121% mod, but it's only dodging physical attacks, so against magic that won't mean anything, but overall, you got 2 really good counter abilities that I've seen really turn the fight pretty easily. And the overall job in kit, going with an A+ here, stellar in perils, great courage counter capability with all the follow-up damage. It's a fun X factor to bring to the fight with some of the double and triple hits, and some CT down potentially. It's on one of her abilities. It's not as oppressive as Alaya's Stag Impact, but Alaya will likely be in some of these teams, so you combine the 2 of them, there's some fun things to play with. Now for the final grade, I'm going with an A here. I do think she is right below A2 in terms of this collaboration release. I know JP is using a ton of her at the moment, but it is partially map driven in terms of the map buffs that they've given. We've seen how influential that can be with the lightning meta as of late, with all the lightning buffs that they were given. She's a superbly balanced unit. She will dominate, but there is counterplay. I don't think it's the kind of unit that you're going to have to wait for the next unit to come out to counter her. I think there's counter characters in the game at the moment. Really just a matter of the build and the matchup. And so for the general thoughts, evasion can be kind of non-traditional, where I don't think she's a double luck card kind of unit, which is kind of the standard for the evade units as we know them. Her weapon adds 10 evade on a critical hit. It's also 10% extra to strike damage, that she'll get an extra 10% evasion rate. The second buff is 25% evasion like many. So though the vision card isn't exactly the same as you might be used to, the rest of it's pretty much the same, but it's an honorable mention here. It doesn't have to be that way though. She does have that physical barrier, the 25 unit res on her main AoE. She does have some bulkier passive abilities that can give herself AoE res. There's a self-heal for second fights. There's some elemental chain res. She also has a counter ability that can give her 40 AoE res for 1 turn. So should you abandon some of the evade upside, there are alternative options for bulk, which I think is really interesting. She's a seamlessly good earth unit where their VCs are like kind of tailor-made for her. She's a huge Bradley supplement for that 50% AoE crush and how she amplifies his damage. She doesn't really rely on the slash res pen like many of those modern earth teams do, between obviously Bradley, but Halloween Lucio, some of the evade units like Ketone and Immortals is on. Obviously Halloween Fred is in that discussion for how little she might be played, but still, she doesn't rely on that like many of the earth units do, which is certainly nice. But she's also a seamlessly good strike unit. She's got double and triple hits for chain. She's got a 38% strike and peril on her limit break. Her teammate buff is a 40% attack buff and 30% decrease AP consumption to herself and allies. So the allies get a great buff there from a physical damage and damage uptime perspective. She's technically an upgrade, in my opinion, to Urel for strike versatility in terms of adding in an earth unit to strike teams. And the 30% strike res pen is technically a step higher for many of the older strike units where they're limited to 10% strike res pen, which is definitely noteworthy nowadays. Now, she does have a general dispel. I'm not convinced you'll see it used often, though. We'll talk about that on the guaranteed hit, which it's tied to in the job section. She is an excellent crit rate and crit damage unit. You absolutely want to lean into that aspect of her because of the follow-up damage and how the mechanics of that damage works. The survivability, in my opinion, is still a little RNG dependent with no courage, no re-raise, and there's no like evasion or accuracy counter antics. And I use that term where like we've seen someone like Starlight Elena, she has the anti-accuracy counter where she'll like reduce accuracy by 30%, or there's some units that will gain evasion as a counter ability. There's really none of that in the kit, so whatever her hit rate is, it's basically staying that way after the buffs wear off. And I say math nerds will figure this out because we will find an approximate level of like, hey, meet this level of accuracy and she's not going to be a huge problem for you. But just as an example for what I mean, my sample build you'll see at the end here, that's the maxed evasion perspective, is a 305% evade rate. That number will make sense in a second. When you use her buff and then her weapon at the 10% on crit hit, that 305%, if you compare that to Starlight Elena with her 25% buff, Starlight Elena's at 360%. That's a 55% hit rate difference in terms of the differences in ceilings of potential hit rates. So it's not unsolvable. It's not nearly the same RNG mechanic that some of the top tier evade units bring. But enough about math, let's talk about the job. The passive abilities here, the 2 of my favorites are Attack Enhancement 2P. You'll have this on, I think, all the time. That's 24% attack, 40 defense pen, and the 15 crit rate. Thief Lore is my personal other favorite, where the agility of 12% obviously really needs to get her into that higher tier of turn priority, but as an evade unit, the agility directly impacts your evade rate as well. So I like that. Obviously, the move +1 is certainly nice. The auto repair, I do want to talk through this because it's very easily misunderstood. The way this works is that she will regen 60% of her health when performing a non-damaging ability if her health is below 70%. I know that sounds weird, but think of the easiest way to think about this is a Guild War fight. You go into the second battle, you're at 30% of your health from left over from the first battle, and you use a buff on turn 1. Well, the fact that you use a buff, which is a non-damaging attack, and you're below the 70% threshold, she will heal herself 60% of her HP pool. So it's not the traditional heal back that we're used to seeing. It's the also 15 AoE res. So I do like this for certain scenarios, but I don't think it's as oppressive as some might seem at very first glance. But the other ones here, Chivalric Metal is certainly nice for that bulk that we were talking about, for the 40 elemental chain res, the extra 12% HP. And to me, Axe Knight Lore is really only there for like PvE potential when you're trying to like min-max your attack stat. But overall, I think the two I've highlighted are really the bread and butter of what you'll end up staying with the majority of the time. Now the counter abilities, I think the perfect evade 2P is all you need. It's a 20% to slash and strike damage. It's a general reflex. I mean, I wish it was against all damage types, quite frankly, but still, Slash and Strike are pretty popular. Other than that, Willing Protector I do like too for that AoE res of 1 turn, just to make sure that she doesn't take an abnormally high amount of damage if someone happens to hit her. But yeah, counter abilities, overall in a decent spot. The main job buffs. Now, the first one is the teammate buff here. That's the physical barrier, the attack buff, the reduction in AP consumption, the 20 defense. The most important buff, though, the most important buff, is the second one here. It's her self buff. We've seen this a lot lately with new units where they're becoming like 2 buff units that if they don't get that second buff off, it's a drastically different unit we're talking about here. 2P is absolutely that unit. You need this second buff here. 25% evade rate, 25 crit rate, and it's 2 additional abilities. One of them is the follow-up attack that will Dispel Protect. This is where that critical rate, critical damage, human killer, those things all factor in here. But she also gains a second counter ability that when she evades a physical hit up to 4 squares away, when she does, she will counterattack them for the 121% mod. That is a big part of her potential damage output as you weave in the evasion. So yes, that second buff is very important. Now for the main job offensive abilities, 4 different strike-oriented abilities here. One of them is an AoE, 3 of them are unit scaling. You know, it goes up to 5 squares away, but other than that, it's pretty short range and pretty, again, unit-oriented here. Punish is not a great ability. That is very bare bones as far as things go. It's very cheap, though. That's definitely nice. The guaranteed glitch is the one that I wanted to talk through here, though, where this is the guaranteed hit. The problem I have with this ability, is that if you look at Double Burst, which is this 120 ability, it's the same modifier of 165%, but it additionally has the defense pen and the physical barrier break. What that means is from an AI priority in maxing damage, the AI will always pick Double Burst. The only time it won't is if the hit rate is either 0% or so bad, I think it's like low double digits, like 10% or 15%, that the AI will opt for guaranteed glitch instead, in which case you'll get the guaranteed hit for 3 turns. The problem is, because she's a very high luck unit, I don't know if you're going to get to that 0% hit rate against some of those evade units in that evade versus evade matchup. You could, but it's not a guarantee. So although I really like this option for the guaranteed hit and the follow-up of the dispel buffs after the damage is applied, there's some funky mechanics going on here that the hit rate will influence how the AI uses this. So it's there. I got to test this more, though. Now, Phasal Smash, though, saving the best for last here. This is that 50% AoE crush. It also moves her to the panel. It also is the 25 unit res. This is really the ability that pops off the page that most people love. The only downside, in my opinion, to this is it's amazing for teammate enabling, but she's got no other AoE abilities here, though. So, okay, you crush the enemy AoE res of 50%. It means you have to use Phasal Smash again as the follow-up. I wish she had a second AoE ability here that she could kind of like trade off between the two and not just spam this, 3 times in a fight and waste it all pretty early. But I think that's where the sub-jobs will obviously come in. We'll talk about that in a second. But for now, the Limit Break, it's a 4 square range ability. It's a triple hit. It's a 38% strike imperil, 43 AP. Pretty good limit break for what it brings. I like that it adds that extra imperil into the fold of things. Now for the sub-job, this is where I think the AoE topic comes back into the fold. To me, I like this sub-job best, in my opinion. Concussive Roundhouse adds an AoE ability here that can take advantage of the 50% AoE crush. The stun is certainly nice. A lot of people are gearing for stun res at the moment, though, because of VV being in the game. That I don't think this has enormous upside for the stun potential. I really just see this as like a versatile AoE to add into things. Desolator's okay. I like it just from the triple hit perspective, but I don't think it's superior to the other abilities on the main job, which are also single target oriented. So this one's okay, but I think it's Concussive Roundhouse that really does it for me, because if you look at Axe Knight, Sleep or Sweep, which is fine, but it's got no slash res pen, so the damage is going to be very meager comparatively. And people are also gearing for sleep res at the moment too, with Helena running around, so I don't like the status effect upside of that. This sub job is okay. I don't like any of the buffs better though than the 2 buffs on the main job, nor do I like any of the offensive abilities better. So this sub job is not preferable in my opinion. And even the Thief sub job, this to me is only for PvE content where you have steal time, because I don't think the rest of these offensive abilities is only 2 on here. Not even. There's 1. There's literally 1 offensive ability. None of this does anything for damage output. Steel Heart, I don't like either, because the main job has the guaranteed hit mechanic that if your hit rate is 0, I'd rather her use that than use Steel Heart. But yeah, sub jobs kind of wonky. That's why I prefer the main one, all things considered. Now for the TMR review, this TMR, it's okay. Not my favorite. Reaction block 50. She doesn't really have any innately, so this, like, for her is actually a really good one that'll get her up to 50. But there's enough characters that have it innately. There's other TMRs like the Bradley TMR, which I think is superior to this, that have the reaction block as well. The regen, it's okay. Regen to me though is not worth the TMR ability though. Regen's really good if it's like part of a character's kit, where I think of characters like Charlotte, Asterisk the Past, Whisper, it's already in one of their buffs, so it's a really nice value add. But to go for a TMR buff just to get regen, I don't think it's that powerful. I don't really think this TMR has any big upside. Now for the job-based vision cards, there are some obviously amazing synergies for strike units, as we've come to know. The most notable one is the Spear, where they share Believers in the Bronze of Brotherhood, which is the agility and unit res vision card. Also has the AoE res for the Setting Sun. That's the best matchup altogether. Axe does have some good options here for AoE and agility cards. Unfortunately, the Halloween Lucio vision card does not have strike units on it, so all that extra agility and luck on that vision card is not something that 2P is eligible for, despite Axe being a relatively favorable cross collaboration. I think the only other one here is maybe the Mace one, kind of the same idea. You have an agility and an AoE card. And Staff Devout, technically, because Believers in the Bonds of Brotherhood is such a good vision card, that Staff Devout can certainly slot in here very easily and combine with them. I mean, the strike-based vision cards, we've been very familiar with these through the strike meta. These are some of the best job-based vision cards in the game. We're going to get a 2P card next week as well, which certainly slots in very well to adding in another attack percent card. The dexterity percent is amazing for her crit rate overall. The magic res is very timely for the meta that we're in right now, so it only gets better for strike units, realistically. That I love the vision cards. Obviously, there's a lot to work with here. Now, for the general optimization, I do think her weapon is the best one for a variety of reasons. I think the only fist I would ever consider otherwise is the Tiger Claws for the extra AoE res. Very niche. Now, for the other equips, I want to honorable mention Black Garb is not equipable by her. I bring that up because a lot of people, when they see Cloth and Evade, they think Black Garb. Not an option, though. She cannot equip it. It's only the Santa outfit. And I don't like the future black box accessory for her. To me, being an evade unit, it's really Santa outfit or nothing. These accessories are very subpar, very niche, very high-end for what you might potentially hit for evade capabilities. If you're running a non-evade 2P, the general stuff, the Alex ring, the survival vest, the Genji glove, nothing special there. But yeah, equipment, she's kind of hard stuck for her main weapon and the Santa cloth, in my opinion. Now, Espers, Dark Odin, Dark Ifrit, and Touch of Sylphid are obviously still must-haves for the evade rate on them. Glacial is kind of like a top step down from Tetrasylphid, but honorable mention there. Should you drop the 2P evade build, simply matchup specific your Esper. Go for element res, go for attack percent, things like that. Now the TMRs, pretty standard stuff here too. I like the ones that do have haste capabilities, but other than that, she's not a TMR unit as seen by the 2 buffs where you must prioritize both buffs. Throwing a TMR in there is very risky. Really not a fan. I have the Lara backpack here just as a stat stick, not even as an ability-oriented one, that when it comes to agility and evade percent, Lara backpack is still very good for evade units. And same thing for the Halloween Lucio TMR, that there's a lot of evade on that TMR as a stat. Now for the sample builds, the first one here is a general Earth Evade, and this one's technically slightly subpar for Halloween Lucio, where, yeah, you're bringing up 2P, but you're kind of bringing down Lucio because you're not able to use his vision card in this build. And so for here, I actually have Titan in the main slot for all the evasion that it gives to Earth units. It's also the physical man killer, which is crucial for her follow-up ability, which is a big damage increase for her. I think you can flex this subvision card here on Dialdo to a different agility-oriented one. I know not everyone has the Halloween monsters. And the Mont card here, you could also theoretically flex for something else. Where this does have the Earth attack up, it's got the slash attack up, but Lucio's really the only one using the slash attack here. So there is some vision card flexibility. The equipment and passive is kind of what we already saw. I am running a luck set here and an agility set here for what I would prioritize putting on her. The general stats, 8,500 HP is pretty par for the course for your average evade unit. 14 defense, 16 spirit, only 1247 for attack. So again, not used to what we're seeing in terms of that very, very high attack stat. 112 agility, certainly serviceable in terms of turn rotation. 479 luck looks below average, but you kind of make up for it because I have 126% evasion due to that Titan vision card here in the main slot. So that evade rate percent is at 290 innately. The rest of this, 20 unit res, 30 AoE res, no reaction block rate at all, which is kind of a red flag in the current state of the game. Does get up to 77 Earth attack, 15 strike attack, 55 human killer is enormous for that follow-up damage as we were talking about. 50 defense pen innately, and that's really it. Again, pretty straightforward from a stat perspective. There's really like no wrinkles or oddities into this build. It's basically what you see is what you get, and you have to rely on her offensive capabilities and dodging some of those hits to really make that teamwork. This is not my favorite team, though. I do still think my favorite Earth team likely brings King Bradley into the fold a little bit, but even King Bradley nowadays, we've seen has some difficulty with magic matchups. Going against Bridal Alaya, it's a much closer matchup than people are comfortable with. So while I think it's a very viable build and I like the synergy, I wanted this one as the evasion example because I wanted to talk about the strike team here as the opposite, where although it might seem like it's not a evasion-oriented team, this 2P is actually slightly less evasive, not horrendously so, but definitely a fair bit, where if you look at the prior one, her evade rate was 290%. This one is 20% less evasive. And let's talk through the vision cards here. You'll note there is no luck percent vision cards here. Now, I do have the full metal one highlighted here as a yellow box because, sure, theoretically you could put Secrets of the Heart here. I actually would recommend that for many. I think you could put this full metal card in the sub slot here, like where Elias is, where I do like Summer Vision card for the debuff weakening and whatnot, but I do think the 35% luck in the main slot, not only good for the evasion, it's good for all of their accuracy, all three of them. I love that for that reason. But keeping things the same, you're still roughly about the same amount of HP. You do get a higher attack stat here of 1447. We saw the evade rate drops about 20% altogether. A little less bulky here, only 16 unit res and 36 AoE res, but remember she does get 25 unit res on her AoE crush ability, so that unit res will get higher. The modifiers take a little bit of a step back here where you drop down to only 25 earth attack. You do go up from 15 strike attack to 64 strike attack, so way more there, but the human killer also drops. You're going from 55 down to 30. Still maintain the 50 defense pen. You do get 10% debuff weakening. This one, I won't say it's necessarily better or worse stat-wise, but I think this team is probably better than the other teams. So 2P is still a very valuable part of this team, but hopefully this gives you some insight as to the stat min-maxing for. And then for the Truststones, left side to me is always luck. You'll never not go luck unless you go for a non-evasive build. Then sure, go for HP, go for defense, go for spirit. On the right side, I think agility is the primary one too. Again, the speed, you really want to get it to that faster, elevated agility level. Plus you get the extra 5% evasion rate on those Truststones. The right side here, attack 20%, defense pen 10. I like the crit rate and crit damage, dexterity and acquired AP as well. You could probably put earth attack in here for the acquired AP. I think that's likely to be one that you could potentially drop off. The healing power, I really don't see a big upside for her. She does not have as many healing mechanics in her kit, and strike teams are not really known for any external healing, and even the earth teams not necessarily known for their healing either. So this is a unit where I don't think you need the healing power like you do for some, but that's the 2P character review in a nutshell. Again, this is a very, very good character. The timing is really good. I think the AoE Crush is a really great value add for a variety of different teams. It's going to help King Bradley. That's going to help Perrine in that strike team. I think her level of evasion is just good enough that it's going to catch a lot of people off guard. It's going to have to change how they build some of their teams. Vivi Helena teams are definitely going to struggle hitting that in terms of their non-guaranteed hit abilities. And honestly, although there are counters for her in the game, any wind unit, but really like Wind Glaciella, the new Veritas unit, Ed Elric, they'll do very well against her. But there's that wind team is not a huge threat at the moment, so you're really relying on a lot of other people just to kind of like outbuild you and beat her more organically. But that's my thoughts for today altogether. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll talk to y'all later.